This is that awkward moment where I play with the microphone and you all wait to see what happens next. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. I have to say, you took a risk by inviting someone with the name Karen to your event this evening. I want to report, though, that I don't have any complaints for the manager. This is a 10 out of 10, 5-star event tonight, and bravo to the Board of Trustees and Classic Provisions and Katie's Bakes for such a wonderful evening. So thank you for such a beautiful night. When I was asked to speak tonight, I thought it would be appropriate for everyone to know where the story of Saddleback Molly, the skiing moose, came from. So I'm going to share with you my journey with the Rangeley Lakes Region, and I know that some of you who might not be from here may have similar stories in your background. But first of all, I have been suffering a severe case of imposter syndrome with the release of this book, because that's a title I am completely unacquainted with. When Peter Hayes reached out to me and he asked me to come to the library to read to children, I was floored. But then when he asked me to speak tonight, that was never on my radar, and I was truly taken back. I'm thrilled the Rangeley area has embraced the book and supported my jump into children's literature. The kind accolades and pure joy people have shared with me have made such an impact on me. At the July 3rd sale, I was actually outside the Rangeley Adventure Company with my book doing signings, and I had a gentleman come up to me and explain with his new house he's building, he has a whole wall he's dedicated that he wants to buy one of the paintings Matt made from the book, because he wants Molly in his house. And it's stories like that that really, make me, they really fill my heart. I'm originally from the North Conway area in Bartlett, New Hampshire, but this part of Maine has always been a special place. When I was a child, my family camped remotely on the shores of Aziscahas each summer. Picture this, like a canvas tent with the old aluminum poles, all packed up with 3 kids and a wooden penyon, headed up Aziscahas, and that's what we did. And I remember the beaches, and I remember the rain, and I remember the card games, and I remember all of the fun. And then as we got older, things got a little bit more leisurely, and my parents started renting a camp at Weatherby's camp at Haynes Landing every year for a week. And so we would come up, my teenage years were spent on Moose Lake McGuntick, doing all the things that you do on a lake in the summertime. And my parents had their boat there, and it was just such a joy to grow up with those experiences. And when I met my husband Todd, who's here tonight, we dragged him to the lake, of course, and my dad, wanted to prove who was the man in the house. And so I remember him on the back of a tube being flown through the air like 6 or 7 feet, but he wasn't going to let go because Dad was going to prove who the man of the family was. And we have some crazy pictures from that event, and Todd, you're still around, so I guess you passed the test. My parents are over there tonight with Todd, so I'm sure they're appreciating some of these stories. But we had such an attachment to this area that when we decided to get married, there was no place that we wanted to be but Aquasic, and we got married in the Little Log Church. We had our reception at Bald Mountain Camps. We took a little steamship from Haynes Landing over to Bald Mountain Camps. We had our our yellow lab with us as our ring-bearing dog, as Mainers do. We always have our yellow labs with us, and so that was really, we've just been connected for so long. And then before we were married, though, I attended school in Vermont, and after working as a teacher in Vermont for a few years and commuting from Vermont to New Hampshire, where Todd became part owner in the business Northern Waters on the shores of the Androscoggin and Errol, we decided that it was time for us to move from Vermont over to this area. We kind of drew a circle around Errol, and we landed in Andover. And so being in Andover, we started skiing at Sunday River, and we quickly realized that Sunday River was not where we wanted to land as a skiing family. When our daughter was born, I remember running defense behind her, as she was skiing to make sure she wasn't run over by somebody. And I remember, this must be how Tom Brady is protected before he makes a throw, right? As my husband and I are behind our little child trying to make sure she's protected. So one time when we were up here at the lake and we had our daughter here, Todd suggested maybe we should try, skiing at Saddleback. And so it was a far drive for us, but it would have the laid back atmosphere we craved. The slopes weren't crowded and people were extremely friendly. And the real clincher was the terrain though. There's no other Maine mountain with terrain as fun as we have here. So after the commuting from Andover, we decided it was going to be our home mountain, and the commuting from Andover became old. We got an old RV, we parked it at the Cupsuptic campground in the wintertime. Those were warm nights. And and then when the campground changed owners, we ended up renting Lynn Byron's camp in Sandy River Plantation. And it didn't have water, but it had electricity and a wood stove, and that's all we needed to make sure that we could stay a Saddleback family. Our daughter Madison, she grew up on the slopes of Saddleback. She skied with the Meisters program on weekends, and we forged such amazing friendships with skiers. It was a terribly sad day when Saddleback announced it was closing. It was like a piece of us, really went away. And our friend Chris made these hats that said Saddleback Refugees, and a bunch of us had them, and we skied down at Black Mountain in Rumford, and we were together, but it wasn't the same. So when Saddleback opened, it was like coming home again. And they say you can't come home again, but you can, and we did. Even with COVID keeping us all at an arm's length, the mountain brought our winter family back together, and it was the absolute best reunion. And then in the flurry of the COVID real estate rush, Lynn sold us that camp, and it was a decision we will never regret. It's now at least insulated. We call it our little gnome home. It's a cute little A-frame camp by Cascade Stream Gorge. If you go to the gorge, you probably look at the little A-frame, you'll know exactly where we are. So the absence of Saddleback in our lives for 5 years was part of the book's inspiration. But the famous Facebook moose that was roaming Saddleback's ski trails was really what really brought it to life. One July day last summer, we were drinking coffee in the morning. Somebody on Facebook had posted, has anyone seen the moose this summer? And, I said to Todd, this moose has got to have a story. I have a friend who had written stories about Eddie the Yeti and Betty the Yeti at Sunday River. And I'm like, well, if there can be Eddie and Betty, then there can be a moose at Saddleback, right? And I know Sunday River, Sugarloaf, we won't talk about that too much, has their own moose. But their moose are nothing like our Saddleback moose. Our Saddleback moose are definitely special. So, I grabbed my laptop, I wrote the first draft, and it just felt right to combine the ski area's rebirth with these moose sightings and developing a story there. And then when it came time to really bring the story to life with illustrations, I wanted someone who knew this area, who loved it as much as my family did. And so I asked some friends, they suggested Matt Gross, and then I put it out on the Friends of Saddleback Facebook page, and people mentioned him, and then Matt actually reached out to me. And it was really wonderful that I didn't have to go to him first. He came to me, and he's like, I've always wanted to do a children's book. So I sent him some really horrific stick figure moose pictures on a storyboard that I created. I show these to children, and children are very kind. They're like, oh, those are such good drawings. And I'm like, no, they're not. And when I read at the library yesterday, I showed them to the stick figure moose to people, and the adults, thank goodness they chuckled. The children are just too nice. They're too, they think any drawing is good, right? So he was just fantastic, and he had never done a children's book or anything like that. He'd never painted moose, because painting is his medium. He watched YouTube videos about moose. He sketched moose. He sent me pictures of moose. We talked about how are we going to make the moose have emotions and feelings. We talked about, the moose has to have big teeth when it's smiling, and all these different things. He lives in Brunswick, I live in Rumford, so we would meet in Auburn at the Starbucks like once a month, and he'd have his paintings and we'd go over them and we'd set up the timeline. And my brother, luckily, was writing a novel at the same time, and he's also a graphic designer, so my brother ended up doing the graphic design for the book. So it was really this wonderful, grassroots, a group of rookies coming together to do something for the first time. And I had sent it to a couple publishers in Maine, and I got a response back from one of them saying, sorry, we already have a moose book this year. And I didn't hear from the other two, but so it was like we launched into self-publishing, and it's a hard thing to do, but I really felt passionate about this project, and I really wanted it to come to life, which killed my husband, Todd. He really wanted to tell everybody about this book. He absolutely wanted to tell everybody, and I was like, no talking about this book till I have it in my hands. And we'd be at an event and he'd start talking about the book, and I'd be like, okay, Karen's not working on anything right now. So when I finally had a book in hand, it was really amazing. And then I put a picture of it online, and the next thing I know, I'm getting a message from the Hayes family saying that they want to buy a copy for their granddaughter. And it was that moment that I was like, oh, someone wants to hear this story. And since then, it's just been so many positive things about the book, so many connections to Saddleback, so many people telling me how much they enjoy the book. So it's been quite the journey. Thank you for supporting Molly the way you have, especially the trustees of the library. You've been some of my biggest supporters. Matt and I have discussed more books about Molly, so stay tuned. There will be more. Maybe Molly needs to learn how to shred the woods. Maybe she meets a male moose. That was a question yesterday at the library. Is there a boy moose somewhere? And I'm like, well, the nest might be a nice place for a wedding, So we've got some ideas. So you never know what Molly might be up to next. If you haven't read the book, the story of Molly is one of community, bravery, and curiosity. For anyone who hasn't experienced the joy of having a home, ski mountain, and a winter family, there isn't anything quite like ski communities. My parents are from New York City. They're both from Queens. They did not know how to ski. Where I grew up in the Mount Washington Valley of New Hampshire, luckily at schools, they teach kids how to ski like they do here in Rangeley. So that's how I learned, and they were such supporters of my brother and I skiing and growing up as skiers. They spent countless hours on the sides of hills, being gatekeepers at races and all of the things. So we were a ski family, but my parents didn't ski, right? So we weren't a family that went on ski vacations. We went to a lot of ski races. My parents spent a lot of money on ski racing, that's for sure. But we didn't go on ski vacations and things. So there's ski families that go and travel and they ski, but then there's the ski family that you develop at your mountain and in your home hill. And to give you another example of this, my father had some health challenges and ended up in the hospital, and we were down at Maine Medical Center. By the way, cardiac unit, 10 out of 10, big windows, private rooms, giant TVs, all the things, worth the money. So while we were there, one of my Saddleback friends who's a med-surg nurse came to visit, and then I said, when he knew that he had to get a pacemaker, there was this discussion. I said, oh, Dad, maybe my friend will be your cardiologist. And he was called me up. He's like, guess who's my cardiologist? One of your Saddleback friends. And then he said, I saw on his camera back up at the mountain that it snowed, this was something like that. And then, we ended up back at the emergency department, and another one of my Saddleback friends who works on ski patrol and is an emergency room doctor down there, he came with his wife to visit. And my dad said, what is it about all these Saddleback friends? They're just everywhere. And so that's the family that we have here, right? We look out for each other, we care for each other, we love one another, so we ski together, but it's more than just skiing. So I'm very fortunate to have found this gorgeous Lakes region when I was young, and I hope you all, if you read the book, learn from Molly how it's important to always be curious. You never know how far a little bravery will take you, and that you appreciate your ski community. Writing this book was my brave act, and it's rewarded me like I never contemplated. And thank you all for welcoming my family into your family. And thank you.